Our guests today are Paul Conn and Kirsten van Rooijen. Paul is the president of Computershare Global Capital Markets. He's based in New York City. Kirsten is the COO, Chief Operating Officer for Computershare in continental Europe. We're going to talk about virtual annual meetings, Computershares Perspective. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Paul and Kirsten, thanks so much for joining us. Virtual annual meetings, just absolutely huge last year. Probably going to be much bigger this year. You're going to tell us, because this year companies are better positioned to get their planning in order. Last year, all the 12/31 fiscal year companies were doing it on the fly. So Paul, the first question is for you. How much advance notice does a company need to give Computershare to reserve their annual, virtual meeting spot on your calendar?
Well, first, Brock, thanks for having us on. There's a few different ways to answer that question. Really, from a Computershare perspective, we need just 2 weeks' notice to actually get the event on our books. But really, there's a broader answer to that, because we're in a different situation in 2021. Companies really need to be including the details of their virtual meeting in their proxy disclosure. So that pulls the timing back of when they should be consulting with their service providers, so they include this information in their mailing. Last year was quite different because companies were planning physical meetings, and the virtual meeting was really something they reserved should the pandemic hit, which we all know it did. It hit us all very hard, and virtual meetings became really the norm. But this year we're in a situation where people can plan their meetings and disclose their meetings in their materials. So we have clients actively working with us now. We're working on disclosure statements, and now's the time to be both talking to your service providers, working out what your disclosures are going to be, and getting your virtual meeting slotted in with your provider.
And then Kirsten, from the outside world's perspective, I think the biggest issue that shareholders and others had with some of these virtual meetings was the Q&A sessions. Doug Chaw and I taped a separate vid guide about things that companies should consider when they're considering their Q&A sessions. But how does Computershare's platform enable Q&A?
Well, thanks, Brooke. With the Computershare platform, issuers have a dashboard that allows them a smooth control of their interactive Q&A management. So issuers can answer and sort questions. While shareholders, they can also submit questions in writing before or during the meeting. And that happens in our platform as well. So they can log in, post that question, and we have that open up until the meeting and during the meeting. I think we're going to see a lot of development in this area in the coming years, and maybe already this year. What we've seen in the US already is that shareholders could also ask questions through a telephone line, so that they can just dial in and they can ask their questions live. But what we also have seen elsewhere is already that they are dialing into a Zoom-like meeting, like we're having today, with a separate shareholder room where they will be able to see and speak. So the board will then be connected to this shareholder room, and they can actually ask questions live during the meeting. And we already have this available in the US for this year. But I'm definitely confident that we're going to see more of this and more development in this space.
Oh, that sounds awesome. What about the participants in the meeting that are not company representatives? So that'd be the shareholder proponents, those that have submitted shareholder proposals that got on the ballot, or the company's inspector of elections, or the representative from independent auditor. Are they going to be visible like that too?
Yeah, that's definitely an option. What we've seen in the past year is that was mostly done by a specific participant line or speaker line that was controlled by an operator. So basically what we do is we set up 2 digital rooms, which can be done either through a telephone line for an audio webcast, or in case of a video webcast, you would have 2 rooms as well. One is for the board, where the board sits, where we have the independent auditor, the inspector of elections, or any other support of the company. So we would have a virtual boardroom, as we call it. And the second one would be a virtual shareholder proponent room, where we are going to have that they can dial in and they can be seen as well. Of course, you also have to make some contingency planning. So for instance, if a shareholder proponent dials in and it's not working, so you need to ensure that that's planned ahead and tested ahead. But for instance, they could also upload a pre-recorded video in that space so that we have contingency should a shareholder proponent not be able to do that, to ask their questions live. We could also do that in different ways.
And then Paul, how do members of the company, representatives of the company, communicate with attendees during the virtual meeting? Is that feasible?
It is, but maybe if I can just kind of emphasize the point Kirsten just made about video and visual and us interacting the way we are today. In the US, that was a major shortcoming, at least when we listened to the market. Shareholders wanted to see the board, they wanted to see the CEO. The Rutgers report that came out at the end of last year talked about the use of video to really replace audio. And ultimately, this is going to be for the marketplace to sort itself out. But we are going to market with an audio and a video solution. And I think that's going to be well received, both by corporates and most importantly by investors, who are the ones who I think are really pushing for, let's see what's going on at the company. Let's see the board. Let's see the CEO. Let's see what's happening. So the technology is there to do that, and we're excited to be rolling that out. So in that context, to answer your question, the company is able to send messages out to the attendees, and we'll talk about the different types of attendees, the shareholders, beneficial owners, guests. The company can actually publish materials and push that out. They can push out files, they can push out the conduct of meeting. There's a rich variety of tools that we will have available to them so that they can make sure the conduct of meeting is effective.
And then what about pre-recorded presentations by the company? How does that work with your platform?
Yeah, pre-recorded is fine. There were pre-recorded materials used last year that will carry forward into this year. So even if we're in an audio and video environment and a company wants to run a file which is a pre-recorded file, that's absolutely fine. That's no problem whatsoever. We'll have live and pre-recorded, and people will have their particular preferences as to what they want to use to deliver the corporate message to the investor base.
And then Kirsten, let's talk about every company's nightmare. If there's a technological issue during the virtual meeting, what can they do? How do they reach each other, perhaps, if they need to, or reach someone from Computershare or whoever else needs to be reached?
Yeah, so prior to the live meeting, we'll of course have some access and training on the systems, which is super important, and that's to make sure that we manage and check the connectivity. It's best to use the same equipment and location for the pre-meeting activities as you will do during the live meeting. So we really make sure that it's tested. But during the meeting, we will have a designated virtual meeting coordinator. It's a mouthful, but that's the title we use for webcast support, with a live chat also available. So if you have any issues, you can still chat. And that makes sure that you have a smooth execution of your annual meeting. And you also have a meeting operations to manage the meeting operator to manage the conference bridge. So we have that on top as well. And of course, we have the relationship manager, which is key in this as well. That will be your day-to-day contact person, and that will he or she will also be available to you. What we also do is for each meeting is we have a primary and a backup for the telephone conference bridge and for the webcast connection. So for instance, if your internet connection breaks down, that you can dial in on your phone. So we have all these different things ready just in case something happens. And with these redundancies, we reduce the risk of any technical issues. Of course, we'll help our clients to put a strong backup plan in place so they have everything covered.
So these VMCs, do you call them VMCs?
We call them VMCs, yes, indeed.
So do they run these they run a dress rehearsal for your clients?
Correct. Yes, they do. So they do a dress rehearsal. We do actually two things. We have a technical rehearsal and a full rundown of the script. I think that's also something that came into the Rutgers report that Paul was already referring to. It is important to do this dress rehearsal. You really need to do it, and you need to do it twofold. You need to do a technical rehearsal and a full rundown, making sure that your board is comfortable about the virtual meeting aspect. So that is important. Of course, we'll provide logistics as well, so we have everything there during the dress rehearsal. And the more preparation and practice, the more comfortable it becomes. And I think when we look back to 2020, I think most of us were still having conference calls instead of Zoom or Teams meetings also internally. And I think the world has changed. So I think everybody is already becoming more comfortable, but still you need to do your dress rehearsal ahead of the meeting.
And then Paul, what about archiving the meeting for potential, placement on the company's IR webpage?
Yeah, that's a very good question. This is not a technological question. We have files of the meeting available for 12 months. So it's very easy for the corporate to decide they want to host that on their IR website, or they can host that at a Computershare website for shareholders that operate their accounts directly with us. Now, many obviously maintain their accounts with banks and brokers, so the IR website is a very logical place for them to go. So it's really it's another best practice outcome from the Rutgers report, and we've studied that hard. Ultimately, it's for our clients to decide where they want to file these materials, but the material will exist for 12 months and it can be posted. I'm sure it will be most sought after in the weeks and months straight after the meeting, but maybe for a year or so, people will have interest in that on a historic basis. But I think our meetings this year are going to be very, very different to the audio conference type meetings that we had in 2020, when there was really it was a lot more of a chaotic environment. We're in a much better position all to move into this next proxy season with much, much more control and better tools, both for issuers and for investors.
Yeah, and for the audience, the Rutgers report is a paper that came out in the last month about best practices for virtual meetings. And that vid guide with Doug Chaw and I going through the Q&A, we actually dissect a number of the positions taken in that paper. It was a great paper, an update from one that was put out a couple of years ago. So Paul, let's talk about the various other options that your platform offers, particularly like admittance to the meeting, pre-registration, or what other options do attendees have, or the companies have, to set it up for their attendees?
So that's an interesting point. We allow guests to come into the platform. Again, this is a technical way in which we do that is fairly straightforward. Ultimately, this is for the company to decide, do they want to allow guests to come into the meeting? And then the question becomes, once you've decided you want to admit them to the meeting, whether you will allow a guest to ask a question and participate in the Q&A. So we had a number of clients last year, even in the audio-only environment, that allowed guests to participate. And we might talk about that as we move forward. However, very, very few of those companies allowed those guests to ask questions. And that certainly frustrated a few people last year. But I think that's because access generally was rather more constrained in 2020. And we're again going to go into a different environment this proxy season, which I think much more effective access for all shareholders.
And Paul, what would you say were the biggest lessons learned from last proxy season that would be useful for folks to know for this season?
Well, I mean, I think it builds on this issue of who has access. There was a lot of noise in 2020, I think, for a multitude of reasons. Most companies pivoted to a virtual shareholder meeting. We all knew that, so it was a new environment for many people. That's the first issue. I think the second issue was in meetings that we set up for our clients, we had a very clear entry policy. If you had a control number issued by Computershare, you had seamless electronic access to the meeting. If you held your shares with a bank or broker, at that particular point, the only way we could let you into the meeting was if you obtained a legal proxy. Now, that's quite a cumbersome process. We're in a pandemic environment. People found that rather inconvenient. They had control numbers issued by proxy service providers like Broadridge, and they expected to use those numbers on our platform. We have no record of those numbers, so we had no way of validating people. So that really created a lot of frustration, a lot of noise. I think it was misinterpreted that companies were trying to keep their shareholders out. That wasn't the case at all. The virtual shareholder meeting platform providers just don't have access to that data. This year is going to be a very, very different story. We've worked out across the industry some protocols so that the person that has a control number issued by Broadridge can come into a Computershare virtual shareholder meeting or another provider's meeting. So these protocols will be very friendly to issuers and very friendly to shareholders. So I think the whole access model is going to be different. So this is going to be a decision that companies can make as to how they use this new behind the scenes technology. It will apply on the day of the meeting. Investors can still choose in the lead up to the meeting to ask for a legal proxy if that's the way they prefer to go, and come in much earlier. So that option will be preserved. And I think that will take the pressure off guests, because now shareholders will be able to get into the meeting whether they're a registered shareholder or a beneficial shareholder. So that should take a lot of the noise away. And then those parties that have to come in as guests more likely are true guests. It will be much easier then for companies to say whether or not they want guests. And then the second question, if they have guests, whether or not they want guests to ask questions. And I fully expect most of our clients to do what they did last year and say where they're prepared to have guests, they're happy to have them, but they don't want them asking questions alongside shareholders. So I think that the access is going to line up much more effectively with the virtual shareholder meeting platform and processes, and that will deliver a better outcome for everyone. We're all working hard behind the scenes to deliver this for March 1st.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, Paul, I think one of or few of the lessons learned are as well that preparation is going to be key in a successful meeting, and you need to start planning as early as possible. I know that Paul said we can make a virtual meeting in 2 weeks, but again, it is about preparation. Last year we all didn't have that much time to prepare. Now we have. So really that is going to be important that you are making sure that you engage with your partners, like the virtual meeting provider, the proxy solicitor. The earlier you do that, the better the outcome will be. And I think there are many factors to consider, but to begin with, you should be clear on what format you're going to choose, right? I think it is important that you start choosing between what do you want to do, a hybrid or virtual. Do you want to include the beneficial owner access that Paul was talking about? That's something that's new for this market and super excited. And that is definitely something that will where issuers need to think about. And also the best practices that we've talked about earlier on the Rutgers report, make sure that you look at them, make sure that you check whether or not you're complying with them. I think that is something that is going to be also super important. And what we've done to help our clients as well with the Rutgers report is we've created a checklist so that you have a full checklist where you can just cross off if you are adhering to all of the recommendations that are in that report, and also some other recommendations that we've added based on our experience from last year.
I love me a checklist. I wrote a treatise with 300-400 checklists, so I'm all about the checklist. Even if some things I wrote were not checklists, I called them a checklist because other people like checklists too. So,
well, we've had plenty of experience. We ran more than 2,000 virtual shareholder meetings all around the world last year. So that experience, our experience in the US in a pandemic environment, and having had the benefit to read the Rutgers best practice report, we've been able to kind of synthesize all of that experience and recommendations, and we're looking forward to, an interesting and exciting season. And there'll be, I hope, a lot more to offer, and I hope there'll be a lot less noise because of that.
Yeah, interesting, exciting, but everyone's always so happy when it's over.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for
You're very-
joining us, Paul.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. Thank you, Brock.
Thank
Thanks.
you.